In this podcast, Marc Rind from ADP talks about big data opportunities in HR world. So, stay tuned. So, welcome everyone to podcast. Today we have with us Marc Rind, and Marc is responsible for leading the research and development of automatic data processing's ADP's Analytics and Big Data Initiative. A brief bio. In this capacity, Marc drives the innovation and thought leadership in building ADP's client analytics platform. ADP Analytics provides its client not only the ability to read the pulse of its human capital, but also provides the information on how they stack up within the industry, along with the best courses of action in order to achieve its goal through quantifiable insights. Marc was also an instrumental leader behind the small business market payroll platform powered by ADP. Marc led a number of technology team responsible for delivering its critical acclaimed product focused on its innovative user experience for small business owners. Prior to joining ADP, Marc's innovative spirit and fascination with data was forged at Bolt Media, a dot-com startup based in New York's Silicon Alley. The company was an early predecessor to today's social media outlets. As an early data scientist, Marc focused on the patterns and predictions of site usage through the harnessing of data on its 10 million plus user profile. With that said, Marc, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Vishal. Thank you.
Awesome. So let's talk about your journey. If you can walk us through, and I think it was fascinating, and we'll definitely talk about your quantifiable insights. That's always music to the ear for a data scientist. So walk us through your journey.
How did I get here? I started with ADP. It's like 15 years ago. After coming in from a startup, I thought moving to ADP was going to last about 3 weeks, and that was 15 years ago. And the big thing that attracted me, obviously, was the data. Right, data is ADP's middle name. Started as a DBA, worked on Run, as you mentioned, small business platform, which basically was a huge disruptor in the space. And just taking a product perspective, but always having data driving everything. I've kind of moved through ADP, various different product roles, until ultimately, must have been about 6 years ago or so, speaking to some folks about needing to build analytics for our clients. And that product, which is incorporated into ADP's human capital management software, is a data cloud. Data cloud started with your typical analytics, but we realized very, very quickly that we can tell our clients, over 600,000 clients we have worldwide, that we have data for them, and then we can also give it context. So it's not just showing what your overtime rate might be or your new hire retention rate is, by department and whatnot, your typical analytics and intelligence around business, but also be able to provide context. How is that compared to others in your peers? So that started up a benchmark offering to pull all of that data together, which you can imagine was quite the chore to pull all that data together, get data normalized, but also obviously aggregating it and anonymizing it so that we could have it in a big data platform so that we could start pulling insights out, starting to understand what happened to your turnover when you're, say, underpaying in the market, or your people are in a role for too long compared to others where there's a lot more movement based on the job type. So a lot of different things that we're building in with Data Cloud as it kind of perpetuates throughout the entire HCM suite to give our end users insights, and then also provide some guidance and direction that machine learning and the AI can offer based on this treasure trove of data that ADP has.
Interesting. Thank you for walking us through that. So explain your typical day-to-day role in ADP, if you can walk us through that. We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.com AI and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast.
Yeah, so even going back to your prior question, the data scientist role, it's a combination of things, right? There's the your typical data scientist. What I've found is there's three things, right? You have to have your understanding of statistics, your deep math. You've got to have an engineering developer background, right? You have to be able to kind of pull data together and get it into shape. And then the third thing is you have to understand the domain. That's one of the most overlooked and one of the most important things is that you have to have an appreciation and a want to learn more about what it is that you're solving for and what makes sense and what are the factors that are levers that can be manipulated. One thing I found is from a data science standpoint, you can build the coolest algorithm ever if it doesn't have a purpose or if it's not going to be adopted. It's from a product perspective, you're hunting in the wrong place. So from a day-to-day perspective, what do I do? I have a team of data scientists working on things. So a lot of it is, kind of overseeing the progression of the development. There's a section of, there's always an exploration of a section of exploration, discovery work, mucking around there. A lot of the time I'm spending is speaking to clients and to partners around what's possible, explaining, like taking machine learning for humans, right? Humans about machine learning, and that machine learning is trying to learn about humans. So there's a lot of talking and speaking to folks about how things are working and what's also possible to get some ideas from our clients and ultimately from our users as well. So
interesting.
That's the typical. Hopefully, I gave you an idea. What?
Yes, I think that's really helpful. So now let's walk through what is data for a company like ADP. Like, what are some of the use cases that you're trying to battle, and if you can walk us through that.
Sure. It's well, first it's like that coming up with the benchmarks or what is the standard, right? We do, ADP has a national employment report. We have these benchmarks that are in the product. The biggest battle, the first thing that we deal with is getting that data normalized across all of these clients, because clients can call things whatever they want. They have job titles that they run with, but if we want to understand what they should pay, it's getting that normalized data straightened out. So a lot there from a data perspective that we're working towards. Once we get that into shape, it's the benchmarks, and then there's predictive models around, and it's providing direction. One of the big things that came out, we have a tool around identifying employees who might be at risk of leaving the organization. For HR, that's the biggest, the most important thing to any HR professional is finding and keeping the best talent for the organization, right? So providing direction of who to go speak with. And it's not absolute. So that's the other, talking point of, our end users have to understand it's not an absolute, right? It never will be. Like, there's only so much that the data will hold. It's more for providing direction. We phrase it that way, it's much more helpful. So providing direction, whether it's at an individual or from a larger organization, understanding the skills that might be at risk as they're starting to plan for the future about what they need. Like if there are locations of a lot of high risk individuals, what are their jobs, and what the impact would be on the business. We also have tools around pay equity. So identifying areas of people doing equal work should be getting equal pay, right? So helping organizations understand those trouble spots is another use case that we have. We also have a lot of items around, there's your typical forecasting of what overtime looks like. We, exploring and where your hotspots are. But the big thing is, and this is where I think a lot of it is heading, is getting from, normally we have our HR professional, really getting to the people who manage and taking the action. So people who manage groups, need to know how are they doing,
Hmm.
right? Where are their problems and how they might be able to fix it. So we've been pushing a lot down to the manager, and for managers and getting data science out in front of them, you and I might want to sit down and play with data all day and look and search and hunt is great. They're busy probably managing their
Hmm.
organization. So we're pushing a lot of these insights, headlines to them on their phones now. So getting out in front of them. So there's a lot of data science around that, right? To find the problems across the board, where their problems are, and there's something there, and then understanding what's important to each and every user, right? What's relevant to them. So some might care about obviously turnover,
Hmm.
others might not care as much about things like span of control. So it's understanding what's important to them and then pushing the most relevant items out to those managers so that they see it and then have the data back up what it is or how they can go about addressing it, who they should speak to about it.
We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast. Interesting. And I was reading in your bio that you help drive innovation and thought leadership for ADP's client. So how do you drive innovation, or how do you drive thought leadership? If you can walk us through that.
Yeah, that's a great question, man. That's the secret sauce, I think. I like you, so I'm gonna help out. All your listeners. Um, it's interesting. It's first of all, in my opinion, there's a balance,
Hmm.
right? For all startups out there, it's very important to understand it's business too, right? You got to you got to deliver some things. Um, but how to drive innovation, the approach that we take, and if you want to get for any data science team out there, you're going to walk into a boardroom with the folks with the funding, and you're going to try to explain what it is that you're going to do. That's great, but you've got to show them something.
Hmm.
So we've taken this approach with partners where we did something what we call the datathon. And what the datathon is serves two purposes. One is bring the folks together. We kind of locked ourselves in a room for a couple weeks. Smell was terrible, but what came out of it was understanding that the data can do what the idea is, right? So anyone can have an idea. If you don't have the data to do it, then you're wasting time. And the second thing is we brought our designers in very
Hmm.
early on just to hear about the process, and they produced some very early visual prototypes, which was helpful for a few reasons. One was obviously you can show something, or you can go now. You have something to go speak to clients or users to get their feedback is one. But the second thing is it kind of helped to keep the data science teams on target, right? Because we all know you love data science because things will spiral
Hmm.
like crazy, right? Like, oh, what if we did this? And it will go, and then you end up with a whole lot of nothing, right? So um, having the design say, hey, this is what we have to build towards. And in the data time, we said we got to have API that has a model behind it. And in 2 weeks, it's not going to be perfect, but it's directionally accurate, right? Where we have some confidence that with more work on this, can get it even tighter, but it's a great starting point. So when you walk in now, you want the bigger funding. Now you have the product plan, something to show, you have some client user feedback on, yeah, that would be helpful. And at the same time, you also have the backing of, hey, here's the API that has the models that we put together with real data behind it to
Hmm.
give us a starting point. Now now you have some muscle to kind of move forward on getting the project fully fleshed out. So that's what we do. We've seen a lot of great success with that. And it's very important to get
Hmm.
that user feedback up front. on, yeah, you know what, if you could do that, that would be helpful.
Interesting. Interesting. I think one thing that I really like was the part of generating thought leadership, right? So I think we talk to a lot of leaders who are struggling with that idea of making their companies aware of what data could do, right? It's because businesses are doing the way they had been doing their business, right? So now with this new sort of age of thinking of how to approach business, and these sort of insight generators have a lot of good and innovative ideas to suggest, but they don't have what it takes to generate the thought leadership to making business aware that, hey, what are some of your thoughts of how these folks could sort of create awareness or generate the thought leadership to help either their clients or their leadership to buy in to their vision of being data driven?
I think it's another great question. I think first of all, it's, I know this is going to sound crazy, but you got to build relationships with the people who don't have any idea what the heck you're talking about. Like, they like the
Hmm.
concepts.
Hmm.
Um, you've got to get out in front of people, and the important thing is you have to listen first. I know we get out there, we're driving our thoughts, but the most important thing that anyone can do is you have to listen first. And I'll give you an example. I went to a conference. It was actually American Payroll Association conference, and not, you know, your, certainly not your uh, folks who are ready for automation and ready
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
AI to come in, right? So,
Hmm.
and I went, and I intentionally went to a few sessions beforehand to listen and speak to folks and just not push, but just listen. And I learned right away that it was, there is a reaction from people around. Oh my gosh, the
Hmm.
robots are coming to take my job away, and that's
Hmm.
natural, right? So
Hmm.
by listening, and then by it changed the product direction for us to realize that we
Hmm.
need to build an assistant. It's not something that we think that can do the human part of your job. It can do the machine part of your job. And just by listening and speaking to folks, it's so critical to learn. And now when you get into, now you have your ideas and you can speak to, hey, these folks, from learning what you've learned, is incorporated, melded into the strategy, um, helps going forward in pushing the thought leadership to other people who now, hey, you're speaking their language.
Hmm.
The data scientists go in to speak to business and end users. We always go in speaking our language. We're the data scientists, right? We know the data. We have to take the data and the learning. We have to speak their language. And the only way to know their language is to spend time with them and have conversations, build relationships, and listen. Like, we need to do more listening, I think. We go right to talking and wowing people with our brilliance. But the brilliance truly comes from the people who ultimately are going to use what it is that you're trying to solve for.
We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast. Interesting. No, I think that's a very cool perspective. By the way, I do appreciate you sharing that because listening and sort of being. I remember talking to one of the Nike executives in data science space, and he was talking about that. Besides the model, he actually go out and watching, looking in the playing field of how actually kids are playing with the shoe. I said, "What the hell?" And then sort of he told me that you have to understand the human side of your data too at some point, and then at some point we sit in our cubicles, we have this perception, so we have to listen to what exactly this our model and these guys are predicting. So that's, I think, very 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 good thought there for sure.
Yeah, it's key, and I think it's yeah, I think that's a big part of it, and also hearing stories, like, finding the people who are using data, and then the learnings from how it's changed their organizations are very important. That's the other thing, and in the field, like you said, like the exec from Nike, there's data, and then there's still the human elements of it, and how data assists or guides or gives some recommendations of where to go apply the human aspect of it is
Hmm.
key to. It's not binary. I do think it's a combination um, of having data assist the human end of what it is that we're trying to help out.
Interesting. And I think so. I'm very a big fan of companies like ADP from one of the perspectives. So we know that every aspect of business, like when you say marketing, when you say finance, when you say risk, they have been doing modeling and analytics and data driven for ages. But HR is one of the laggard in in that area. HR has been, and in a way, like even when we approach to one of the problem that currently we are working on is creating an AI for career coach. So we talked to a lot of HR folks about what they have, how things could work, and we realized they're very primitive. Like they are very old school, and you need sort of some negotiator who come in the middle with the technology stack and helping these guys. Because right now we're talking like from our vantage point, we are seeing, as you rightly said, there's a disruption of workforce that's going to happen through automation or through AI or what and whatnot, and these HR and sort of needs to be empowered and equipped to handle those scenarios. So how do you see the role of something like ADP in understanding this new paradigm change of whether you say productivity or you say disruption of worker or workplace? What's your thought on that as a data scientist or head of data scientist?
Yeah, that's it's fascinating. It's interesting. Over the past few years, I've seen a very dramatic shift um,
Mm,
in HR's readiness, and you're absolutely right. And admittedly so, like finance, marketing, very data driven. HR it's behind, and behind. I mean, obviously, it's one of the more human
mm,
fields, right?
yeah.
So that being said, you're right. But I have seen. I do a number of sessions. We have our client user conference every year, and I always do a session. And at first, people come in and they're like, a data scientist. Why are we putting a data scientist out there?
Mm,
And they're like, but year over year, the adoption, the willingness, the interest grows and grows. HR Tech is, a big um, HR conference every year, and you can see it grows every single year that data is becoming more and more in the space. Um, and it's something that even ADP has gone through an interesting transformation as well, right? ADP has been around for 60 years, right? Um, have all this data, and ADP has been always primarily data processor for payroll, and then got into HR and very much in a transactional. Okay, we're going to get those checks cut, right? Um, but then as we've seen the need for user experience, we've seen the need for kind of helping organizations understand better and putting products. So the innovation end of it, um, super hot, right? And even ADP has changed, right? ADP
mm,
has moved. Carlos, our CEO, has spoken about ADP in the past has been a service organization that has technology to support service. Now, like the big mandate has been, no, we're a technology company that has service to support the technology. Um, and that's where the big direction has gone. And it's done very well for us because, organizations are looking for that edge and assistance in the
mm,
software used to help across their organization. So it's been an interesting journey for sure. I think HR is coming up to speed a lot more. They're definitely more willing of wanting to understand data. You always hear like any organization say, "Oh, our data is a mess," or "I can't trust the data." It's dirty. Everyone has data problems, right?
mm,
We're seeing a lot more willingness to kind of, and this is like I think the next big hurdle is the democratization of data. We
Hmm.
see a lot of across the industry, a lot of HR teams. They have the data. They keep it for themselves. See, I can't give this to managers. I can't have execs.
Hmm.
This. I can't. There's a lot of worry about, oh my God, if I get this out and the data is not perfect, then what? You know what? Everyone knows data can be better, right? The more you expose it um, to management, to your managers, to your executives, and share that data, um, there's much greater success and trust, right? So if you as an HR organization are seeing this like time and time again, I'm hearing more and more stories about it's the HR teams that are sharing data and numbers,
Hmm.
understanding, and there's an organization-wide understanding of how clean is that data. But
Hmm.
because HR departments have data and they can measure, there's been a lot better adoption of policy changes that they've wanted to put into place because they now have the means to measure it, right? You can't. It's hard to say, oh, let's take a policy, let's change the work at
Hmm.
home policy, or have pay increase, or try to promote more promotions and movement, or even go so far as let's add another element to the interview process to make sure that we're
Hmm.
getting cultural fit. And there's one thing about walking into that room and saying, I read this in an article, we think it'll help,
Hmm.
versus, hey, we think this will help, and we have these means to measure it. So as this project and we implement this policy, we'll be able to see our new hires staying longer because they have the data, right? And
Hmm.
because they have that data, um, there's a lot greater trust to the HR team to make these dramatic organizational changes because there's data that they can measure, see, and then switch
Hmm.
if,
Hmm.
hey, you know what, this isn't working out as we planned. Let's tweak it. So um, it is really starting to get that seat at the table that the HR department always wants, right? And by having the data, it's giving them more right, I
Hmm.
think, and starting to see it to be able to sit down and change the organization, not just change the HR function. So
Interesting, interesting, fascinating. So, and one more thing that I really like about your profile was I think I read two keywords which two words which are very music to my ears: product development and chief data scientist. So I think I talked to a lot of leadership on data science space. Hey, you should look at your practice as a product, so that you can, because then you can sort of think of it as a capability that you can ship it out. So can you walk us through some of the challenges or some of the opportunities that you see handling a product side of this capability as well as the data science or the thought leadership point of view?
yeah, um, challenges and opportunities of handling both product and data. So it's and data science. I think it's by having the product end of it has been very good because it keeps us focused, right, on an
Hmm.
end result, and that's important, very important. Um, One of the challenges is you always, so you have your roadmap and
Hmm.
the partnerships, and hey, we need to roll this out. There's a lot of work in obviously getting product rolled out, and then figuring the strategy of where next, the benefits, the time. So there's a lot of that back and forth that the product dictates. You've got to always remember and have side time on the exploration piece, right? On the, I don't know, is there a relationship? Like, go study something, and that's if you just, you still, my feeling is you always, if you have product, you have purpose, um, with the data science stuff, which has been great, right? And direction, and clear, hard deadlines. Like, that's, look, if we didn't have deadlines, my crew, I mean, they're
Hmm.
fantastic. They would spiral and go and dig in a hole.
Hmm.
Hillary Mason does a great job in explaining what happens when you get enough data scientists that are interested in something.
Right.
It'll spiral, right? And not get, so the product end is great to kind of keep focused, which is great. Um, and then but at the same time, you still You got to always have a couple of folks in your back pocket taking some time to go do the exploration and get something going, and then get that innovation piece, so that now when people are asking, well, what's next? Hey, this, you're starting in on that research. So there is a little bit of a balance, but I think having the balance is important to keep um, both halves kind of focused and still at the same time moving forward.
Interesting. And you also talked about you're working on this client analytics platform, right? So one of the things that comes to my mind is, what are some of the thinking that gets into designing something like a client facing analytics platform? If you can walk us through that.
What goes into figuring out how
Yeah.
we go.
So how do you end up designing it, and what thoughts you have to sort of pre-bake or post-bake to figure out it's delivering its value, and what are some of the KPIs there, if at all? Like whatever you can share about this
Yeah, sure.
mindset.
I mean, it's finding your clients, start working on things that, because there are other clients that are innovators
Hmm.
also, right?
Hmm.
They're um, just because they're in HR doesn't mean they don't have crazy ideas that they
Hmm.
would be great, and even more importantly, they know more than I do about what they need, right? Because they're the user. So starting getting a hold of some clients, and those conversations, just listening about, hey, would it be cool this? Would it be cool that? My HR business partner, she's she's on a few of our patents, right? Because
Hmm.
a lot of it starts with
Hmm.
the users, right? Starting in with, oh, wouldn't it be great if I could, or I would love if it was able to, and that might be from a design
Hmm.
standpoint. Um, I'll ask crazy questions like, or I'll even start with like something controversial. As a manager, I'll say, I hate this. I hate our tools. I try to
Hmm.
avoid doing performance planning every year, and I like will purposely skip it because the process stinks, right? And I'll
Hmm.
say it outright, and then look for a reaction, and then ask, well, who does it well, and who doesn't do it well, and what makes them do it better, and how do you identify those people? And let's go find those people who like it, or let's find the other people who hate it. And then you get those people in a room, and then you start saying, well, why do you hate it? Like, what could we do
Hmm.
to make it easier? So you start having those conversations, and ultimately someone will say something that someone in that room says, oh, you know what? We have enough data to figure out, chances are, what report it is that you're coming to run. Or, oh, you hate having to schedule things. You know what? Probably we have enough data there that we've seen what everyone else schedules, and we see what you schedule, what time of year you see. So you start those conversations on, okay, we think we might be able to solve for it. And then
Hmm.
the next big thing is you get the data guys in a room and you say, hey, we're trying to solve for something that is going to predict turnover, or figure out what report someone might want to look at. And then you just start having the only thing you're allowed to blurt out is data points, whether you have it or
Hmm.
not, right? I think if I was trying to figure out what report to go look at or run, I'd want to know if there was wrong data in there. I'd want to know who else is running it and what their positions are, what their industries were. Well, I want to know the size of the company. I want to know, is it the time of the year? Is it
Hmm.
how many days before the payroll cycle? Like all of the things that you just churn out there, and just start talking about data points that we think if we pull together, and we had enough data to say, okay, which reports got read and by whom, or got run. I'm just giving you a very specific example. And then you start, getting all the data assets together, and then there you go. You start rolling. And at the same time, then you bring the front end designers in to say, how would they want to consume this? So I think it starts with ideas and conversations about problems that people have, or things that they wish were easier, and then get the folks together to say, well, what are data points that we think might help give some direction on it? And then just
Interesting.
yep.
Interesting. Awesome. So now let's talk about your team building skills. Like if you can shed some light on uh, how do you look at the recruitment of your data science team members? Like what are some of the things that has been working for you? What are some of the thoughts or best practices that you could share for other leaders who are recruiting for their data science teams?
Yeah, data scientists, I get to ask this a lot.
Hmm.
You've got to, there's different types of folks that we discussed earlier, right? But
Hmm.
you have to have people who aren't afraid to learn about the area, like I said.
Hmm.
And by learning it, I mean having conversation. Um, I see a lot more these days, young folks coming out of school, um, developers who are interested in data science, who like pick up and run, right? A lot more of the machine learning, less of the traditional PhD statistic, research. And maybe that's just because the kind of stuff that we're working on.
Hmm.
Um, there are a lot of libraries out there, open
Hmm.
libraries that you can kind of pull in and start. Um, even services to even have pre-built models, right, to start working. So it's a combination of the curious, right, ability to hack some stuff together, as a starting point. But one of the more key points is, and I see this all the time, um, people who are afraid to be wrong are, it's not what you want. You want people to say, okay, this is what the data does, this is what the data doesn't do. Um, and the opening up of what else can we do to get it better. See a lot of people say, "Oh, no, Miles great, Miles fine,
Hmm.
Miles perfect." Um, you gotta be willing to kind of open the doors, and it takes a little bravery, but you've got to be able to say, "Hey, this is what it's doing. This is what it's not doing. This is let's talk and openly collaborate. Collaboration in the data science area is key, um, and that's an important part of it. Like your standard developer can get some requirements to go put their headphones on and build. Um, Data science space, it's got to be a lot of conversation, a
Hmm.
lot of ideas sharing, and a lot of willingness to be wrong and admit to it, and then pick it up and then go forward and make it better. So, from an interview standpoint, I think communication and ask, hey, what project did you work on that you were wrong the first time you did?
Hmm.
Let's see how they react to that, right? If they, no, no, that you've got to,
Hmm.
people got to be upfront and say, hey, this can be better, or this is what it's not doing. Let's get it there.
Interesting. And if some of the leaders from established organization are listening or watching this podcast, and they are thinking of uh, creating a data science practice or center of excellence within their team, what are some of the insights or some of the suggestions that you could provide them to help them get started on this journey?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that we went through, that a lot of large organizations, when I speak a lot about, particularly large organizations, when we talk about, people have data silos. Larger organizations will have, now
Hmm.
we have product data, right? That's
Hmm.
generally what I focus on. But
Hmm.
obviously the data around the servicing the client, data around selling to the clients, data around implementation for the client. I mean, all of that data is all signal, right? It's all
Hmm.
ultimately to be signal. Um, so one of the things that that we've done at ADP and continue to do so is, even though I'm on the product end, is push the agenda and open up the data, right? Open up the, obviously anonymized and aggregated, but
Hmm.
more data you source together and get a common understanding, and also the willingness to um, open the doors up across the organization. Um, and now you have pockets and people who are building things that, someone builds a client at risk model, or someone else, builds a classifier that says, hey, um, these are organizations that are, quote unquote, successful with ADP, right? Or, their stock price, whatever, their revenue.
Hmm.
Like, so you get many different people adding elements to this common kind of, basis of information.
Hmm.
Um, you get wider adoption, right? And you get wider, um, breadth of people that know different challenges, right? That can ultimately be solved, not necessarily just people just in finance. Like if I had a client retention issue in, say, service, I would have to think information that we have on their use of the software, the background of the people who are using the software, like what is their tenure, what is their job role, what is their education, how big is their team, what is, like all that information can ultimately, in my opinion, flow into something downstream that would help service or help sales or help identifying, other um, possible upsells of other products when that organization is ready for it. So I guess that's a long-winded answer to your question of how do any suggestions is out of the gate, open stuff up, avoid building silos, get some key folks in, and get them exposed and hooked into anyone who has any data business use case, and get them all tied together. Don't build pub or little silos of folks. That's key.
Interesting. And
Yeah.
so about your industry, so HR industry or HR tech industry. So if I am maybe an entrepreneur with some knowledge of data science, what are some of the opportunities that are available from your vantage point that I could sort of attack or address, as helping you out or helping the industry out, if at all?
I think if you're an entrepreneur in the HR space and you wanted to get going, what are some of the opportunities? I think one is, and this is something that we do with ADP, is
Hmm.
well, if you're an entrepreneur, you need data, first of
Hmm.
all, data
Hmm.
science. That's
Hmm.
that's I think the hardest part. That's something that we're very lucky for having all of this data.
Hmm.
I would find organizations that are exposing via API. Like we have a API as a marketplace that
Hmm.
has a bevy of APIs that integrate in to the ADP backbone of and building various applications that can kind of add into your ADP experience for ADP clients, right? So
Hmm.
a lot of very cool things that come out of that, like everything from, hey, you have a new hire, just you're a click away from getting all the information, get business cards built out, or managing tips. So there's a lot of opportunities when you can hook into organizations that have APIs that are exposing elements
Hmm.
um, that can now be used to kind of build out some insight, right? So
Hmm.
um, I think that's important. So if you're an entrepreneur, you're in the data science space, and you want to get into HR, it's about, I feel like, finding the big boys, or not even big boys, anyone that has APIs to kind of hook things together. I think it's
Interesting. That's
that's
great
what
thought, by the way. I think that's I do appreciate that. So we're almost at the tail end of the conversation, and I want to focus last few questions on you. And thank you so much, Mark, for candidly helping us understand the industry and the data science perspective in it. So in your journey, and this is I ask all of our guests is, what are like 1 to 3 core component that has really contributed to your success? So what are some of the ingredients that you think are really helpful in your journey so far?
wow. Okay, three few keys to my success. Um, I think one is like I said before, you got to be able to speak to people and talk. I think that's been key for me. I've always enjoyed speaking to people, remembering the people part to help guide on the data part. Is one. Two is you especially in this space, you cannot have fear.
Hmm.
You've got to be a little fearless, and by that I mean you've got to try things out to know even if it will fail. If you can't be fearful of, hey, I built this model or I designed this thing and it's not really working, but you're too stubborn a mule, or you have too much fear to admit that it can be better. I mean, on your journey, you've got to just come in and say, this isn't working. We're going to try something else. I remember we had a prototype, and we removed the technology um, that wasn't working for us. And I was sharing it with the CIO at the time, and now I'm showing him the new thing.
Interesting.
And he's like, "Wait, what happened to the old thing? Weren't you the guy to suggest the old thing?" And I said, just outright, yeah, that was me. And we started building on it, and it wasn't working out. So this thing's better."
Mm.
And he was very thankful. He stopped. He was very thankful to say, "You know what? I appreciate that. I appreciate that." Versus being a stubborn mule to say, "Nope,
Mm.
nope. I said
Mm.
this, and this is where it's going to be." Like, you've got to be able to take a step back, right, and see when you have to change course, and that's appreciated. That's second. And third is just not just inspiring, not just communicating, but listening and giving your folks the ability
Mm.
to and the freedom to explore and come up with ideas, and
Mm.
that they should not have fear. They should
Mm.
feel comfortable with coming in with great ideas, and the best thing to do is, as you're building your teams up, I think kind of driving that, hey, this is fun, and we want to keep exploring stuff, is very important in keeping those minds kind of the pistons firing, right? And
Mm.
people engaged and wanting to keep going. So I think that's the third piece of advice that I would.
Interesting and fascinating, by the way, Mark. And thank you so much for sharing that. And one thing I also want to know from our guest is their favorite read, any particular book or any sort of thing that they have read that they want to suggest to the readers and listeners. And why is that your favorite read, if
Well,
any?
Analytics Week, I think number one, your book. Two,
Yes.
um, I got to be honest with you, I get there's no one, right, because I just subscribe to things, and I let I like to say, I let the robots do the work, like push me the
Yeah.
stuff that I know I'm going to want, right? So I'm
Hmm.
not even sure I keep track of anything in particular. Of course, except for Analytics Week, right?
Right.
That is a study. Um, but there are folks that we all follow. I love Hillary Mason. As I mentioned her
Hmm.
before. She's great. It gives a great perspective. Um, there are others, but right now I'm always a fan of. I know in this day and age, everyone's like protective of their data. I'm more like, yeah,
Hmm.
I want more. I'm going to
Hmm.
click this. I'm going to want to make sure that you're capturing that I'm clicking this, and this is interesting. This article's nah. This one, yes. This one, no. And
Right.
now it's all kind of being served up to me appropriately, but also obviously with I have a mind of like, okay, that's a commercial. That shouldn't be here. Um, but then you kind of you still have to do your own parsing, right?
Hmm.
Make sure the information getting pushed to you it's targeted, but it's also targeted, right? So you
Hmm.
gotta take a level of understanding what's going on in the background before you go after things that is shouldn't be there.
Interesting. Interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. And last but not the least, so I definitely want to um, ask you if you have any closing remark for our audience before we part ways, that you want the aspiring leaders or folks who are trying to create a practice within the organization, and startup folks. Do you have any word of wisdom for those guys?
Um, any words of wisdom for starting their data science practice? Know your data is dirty, and that's okay.
Hmm.
Don't
Hmm.
expect it to be exact. Work with the data that you do have. Um, get something built and get it up and going so that you can start getting feedback. Your first version will not be your last version. But if you don't have a first version, you'll never ever get a last version, right? So you'll never get started until you get something up out there in the faces of your users, or going out and tackling your business problems. Get something up out there and be honest with what it is, right? Hey, this is as good as it is right now. We think it's
Hmm.
better. This is here now to start learning, right? And learning by having the system be used, have kind of get it more. more finely tuned, but also learning in speaking to clients, what more does this thing need to do for you to get there? For you to get there, to use it as you need to, as you would hope that they would want to use. That's kind of my last words of advice.
Interesting. And with that, Marc, thank you so much for walking through this amazing journey and being very, very generous with your time and walking us through understanding the HR landscape and your sort of some of the thought leadership building practices. Really, really helpful for our audience. You're always welcome on the podcast to share your journey. Love to have you back. Whenever you're in Boston, love to meet with you over a beer or coffee or something. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me, Vishal. Thank you very much.